Thank you very much. It's a privilege and honor to be in the white intellectual ghetto of the West. We want to do a couple of things before we started. The first is that based on the fact that SNCC, through the articulation of its program by its chairman, has been able to win elections in Georgia, Alabama, Maryland, and by our appearance here, we will win an election in California. In 1968, I am going to run for president of the United States. I just can't make it because I wasn't born in the United States. That's the only thing that's holding me back. We wanted to say that this is a student conference, as it should be held on a campus, and that we're not ever to be caught up in the intellectual masturbation of the question of black power. That's a function of people who are advertisers that call themselves reporters. Oh, for my members, Mr. Bernard Shaw, 2 days ago, and I came across a very important quote, which I think is most appropriate for you. He says, "All criticism is an autobiography. Dig yourself, okay?" The philosophers Candace and Sartre raised the questions whether or not a man can condemn himself. The black philosopher, who is pregnant, Francis Fanon, answered the question. He said that man could not. Candace and Sartre was not. We in SNCC tend to agree with Candace and Sartre that a man cannot condemn himself. Were he to condemn himself, we would then have to inflict punishment upon himself. An example would be the Nazis. Any of the Nazis prisoners who admitted after he was caught and incarcerated that he would commit suicide. The only ones who were able to stay alive were the ones who never admitted that they committed a crime sick against people. That is, the ones who rationalized the Jews were not human beings and deserved to be killed, or that they were only following orders. On a more immediate sense, the officials and the population, the white population, Mississippi, that's where Philadelphia is, could not condemn Sheriff Rainey, his deputies, and the other 14 men that killed 3 human beings. They could not because they elected Mr. Rainey to do precisely what he did, and that for them to condemn him would be for them to condemn themselves. In a much larger view, the SNCC says that white America cannot condemn herself. And since we are liberal, we have done that. You stand condemned. Now, a number of things that arise from the answers of how do you condemn yourself. Seems to me that the institution that function in this country and clearly racist that they're built upon racism. And the question is how can black people inside of this country move? And then how can white people who say they're not a part of these institutions begin to move, and how then do we become to clear away any obstacles that we have in this society that makes us live like human beings? How can we begin to build instructions that will allow people to relate with each other as human beings? This question has never done that, especially around the country of white or black. On a much immediate scene, the officials and the population, the white population in the Neshoba country, Mississippi, that's where Philadelphia is, could not condemn themselves. In a much larger view, SNCC says that white America cannot condemn herself. Now, several people have been upset because we've said that integration was irrelevant when initiated by blacks, and that in fact it was a subterfuge. An incident's subterfuge for the maintenance of white supremacy. Now we maintain that in the past 6 years or so, this country has been feeding us a drug of integration, and that some Negroes have been walking down a dream street talking about sitting next to white people, and that does not begin to solve the problem. That when we went to Mississippi, we did not go to sit next to Ross Bernard. We did not go to sit next to Jim Clark. We went to get them out of our way. And that people ought to understand that we never fighting for the right to integrate. We were fighting against white supremacy. Now, then, in order to understand white supremacy, we must dismiss the fallacious notion that white people can give anybody the freedom. No man can give anybody his freedom. A man is born free. You may enslave a man after he is born free. And that is in fact what this country does. It enslaves black people after they're born, so that the only acts that white people can do is to stop denying black people to their freedom. That is, they must stop denying freedom. They never give it to anyone. Now we want to take that to its logical extension, so that we could understand. Then, what its relevancy would be in terms of new civil rights bills. I maintain that every civil rights bill in this country was passed for white people, but not for blacks. Period. For example, I am a black. Therefore, I have the right to go into a public place. White men didn't know that. Every time I tried to go into a place, they stopped me. So, some boys had to write a bill to tell that white man he's a human being. Don't stop him. That bill was for the white men, not for me. I knew it all the time. I knew it all the time. I knew that I could vote, but that wasn't a privilege. It was my right. Every time I tried, I was shot, killed, or jailed, beaten, or economically deprived. So somebody has to write a bill for white people to tell them when a black man comes to vote, don't bother him. That bill again was for white people, not for black people. So that when you talk about open occupancy, I know I can live any place I want to live. It is white people across this country who are incapable of allowing me to live where I want to live. You need a civil rights bill, not me. I know I can live where I want to live. So the failures to pass the civil rights isn't being of black power, isn't because of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, it's nor because of the rebellions that are occurring in the major cities. It is incapable of whites to deal with their own problems inside their own communities. That is the problem of the failure of the Civil Rights Bill. And so, in a larger sense, we must then ask, how is it that black people move? And what do we do? But the question in a greater sense is, how can white people who are the majority and who are responsible for making democracy work, make it work? They have miserably failed to this point. They have never made democracy work, but it's inside the United States, Vietnam, South America, Philippines, and South America, where America she has not been able to make democracy work. So that in larger sense, we not only condemn the country for what it's done internally, that we must condemn it for what it does externally. We see this country trying to rule the world, and someone must stand up and start articulating that this country is not God and cannot rule the world. Now then, before we move on, we ought to develop the white supremacy attitudes that we either conscious or subconsciously thought, and how they run rampant through the society. For example, the missionaries were sent to Africa. They went with the attitude that blacks were automatically inferior. As a matter of fact, the first act the missionaries did, when they got to Africa, was to make us cover up our bodies, because they said it got them excited. We couldn't go bare-breasted anymore because they got excited. Now when the missionaries came to civilize us, because we were uncivilized, educate us because we were uneducated, and give us some literate studies because we were illiterate, they charged a price. The missionaries came with the Bible, and we had the land. When they left, they had the land, and we still had the Bible. And that has been the rationalizing for Western civilization as it moves across the world, is that the rest of the world is uncivilized, and they are in the fact civilized, and they are uncivilized. And the runs on today, you see, because what we have today is we have what we call modern day Peace Corps missionaries. And they came in our ghettos, and they Head Start, upward lift, bootstrap, and upward bound us into white society, because they don't want to face the real problem, which is a man is poor for one reason and one reason only, because he doesn't have money, period. If you want to get rid of poverty, you give people money, period. And you ought not to tell me about people who don't work, and you can't give people money without working. Because if that were true, you have to start stopping Rockefeller, Bobby Kennedy, Lyndon Baines, Johnson, Lady Bird Johnson, the whole of Standard Oil, the Gulf Corp, all of them, including probably a large number of the board of trustees of this university. So the question then, clearly, is not whether or not one can work, it's who has power. Who has power to make his or her acts legitimate. That is all. And that this country, that power is investigated in the hands of white people, and they make their acts legitimate. It is now, therefore, for blacks to make our acts legitimate. Now we are engaged in a physiology struggle in this country, and that is whether or not black people have the right to use the words they want to use without white people giving their sanction to it. And that we maintain, whether they like it or not, we gonna use the word black power and let them address themselves to that. But that we are not going to wait for the white people to sanction black power. We're tired waiting. Every time black people move in this country, they're forced to defend their position before they move. It's time that the people who are supposed to be defending their position to do that. That's white people. They ought to start defending themselves as to why they have oppressed and exploited us. And in order to now it is clearly that when this country started to move in terms of slavery, the reason for a man being picked as a slave was one reason, because of the color of his skin. If one was black, one was automatically inferior, inhuman, and therefore fit for slavery, so that the question of whether or not we are individually suppressed is non-sensual, and it's a downright lie. We are oppressed as a group because we are black, not because we are lazy, not because we're apathic, not because we're stupid, not because we smell, not because we eat watermelon and have good rhythm. We are oppressed because we are black.